I think it's very easy to listen to online criticism and to course correct and pivot. And I think if you're constantly doing that kind of pivoting, then you never build anything because you're constantly adapting to expectations as opposed to sticking to your original vision on things.
Hello and welcome back to Road to Rebirth with me, Roland Squire. On today's episode, we're looking at the expanded world of Jurassic. We might not have the billions of seemingly endless series that other franchises produce, like Marvel and Star Wars, but there is still quite a bit out there. Joining me is someone who has taken it upon themselves to fill in the gaps in the Jurassic World story in his very popular audio series Tales from a Jurassic World. Please welcome to the podcast, Tom Jurassic. Hi, Tom. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me on, Roland. I'm great, thank you. And thank you for shouting out Tales. I am excited to be working on the third season of that at the moment.
My first question, as ever, is are you excited for Rebirth?
You know, I think Jurassic Park's a bit overrated at this point. No. I am.
We've set the tone for this episode.
I'm cautiously optimistic. Everything I'm seeing looks really, really good. And I think it looks a lot more grounded than some of the more recent films that we've had.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely looks like it's leaning more into the horror sort of beats that the original film does so well. But I'm apprehensive, and I think it's something that we'll come on to throughout this episode. But I think that Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom and Jurassic World Dominion especially really set us up for like a wider Jurassic World.
Mm-hmm.
And then the premise of Rebirth massively shrinks that world down again.
Yeah.
So I'm cautiously optimistic about how they're going to handle opening us up for more stories in the future whilst seemingly shrinking that potential at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder whether it shrink to then expand again.
Yeah.
It's an interesting way of doing it, I think.
It is. I'm not sure that for either fans or the average cinema-going audience going, oh, dinosaurs are on the mainland. Oh, no, they're not. And then presumably going, oh, yes, they are again, is necessarily going to be the best approach. But we'll see. They might have something in store that we're not expecting.
So I was interested at kind of what your Jurassic story is. At what point did you come to the series?
So I'm quite an interesting sort of case, I would say, because I think a lot of people are longtime fans. And it's nice to actually be talking to another British fan for a change, because my Jurassic origin story, the DNA of that is really Primeval.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up watching Primeval. I absolutely loved that show. And it was only when kind of the 5th season came out and I knew that there wasn't going to be any more that I suddenly discovered this magical film called Jurassic Park. And then at that time, I think it was kind of around 2012, 2013.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of watched Jurassic Park, watched The Lost World Jurassic Park, and then watched Jurassic Park 3. And suddenly all the marketing around Jurassic World was kicking off. So I was like right at the right time to really immerse myself in that. And then I think I really got hooked when I was at college because I was studying creative media. And one of the things that really interested me was how you could use creative media in marketing. So I was absolutely obsessed with the Isla Nublar website that they did for Jurassic World and the way, like,
it was fab.
all of the video content on that, my mind was just racing with it constantly. So that really sucked me in. I then, closer to the release of Fallen Kingdom, sort of submitted a pre-recorded section for the Jurassic Park podcast, I think. So that was before I was even like co-hosting or anything. I think I just like got in touch with Brad and was like, here's a pre-recorded thing if you want to put it on air. And then slowly things built out from there, really.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Primeval being the way into Jurassic.
Yeah. I think for me it was just like the fact that Primeval especially did dinosaurs and prehistoric animals so well.
Mm-hmm.
And although the CGI hasn't necessarily aged the best, there was just something about that I found really captivating. So I think it then naturally led nicely into Jurassic, because I was like, well, Jurassic, at least I know I'm going to get more of it. Whereas Primeval, it was pretty set in stone that it was cancelled and that was it.
Before its time, wasn't it, Primeval, actually, when you think about it now?
It really was. It's something, again, we'll come on to this later when we're talking about what we want, but I'm just putting it out there that a Monster of the Week dinosaur show feels like something that would do incredibly well in the current sort of film market.
Great. Well, let's get on with it. Today, I'd like to try and get to grips with the many expanded stories that have happened with Jurassic over the years. Comics, toys, novels, and TV shows. You're probably better equipped to answer this about the toy line. Do you think that toys can help expand a franchise's universe?
So it is quite interesting, actually, the timing of this and when this episode potentially releases, because it will either release before or after a project releases on Jurassic Collectables. But I can talk a little bit about that project because we have just done a collaboration with Jurassic Library around the Kenner Chaos Effect line. And that whole line, when you look at that, obviously there was the cancelled Jurassic cartoon that I know you're going to talk a bit more about. But a lot of the toys that we got around that time in those latter waves in 93 and then 97, or I think especially 93, 94, were supposedly going to connect to that cartoon. So it seems like initially they were planning to have the two connected a lot more. And what I'm kind of curious about, and there's no definitive evidence out there to suggest if this would have been the case, but it kind of really made me think if that was the plan, if they had gone on and then done lines like Chaos Effect, done lines like Night Hunters, would they have eventually introduced those concepts in the cartoon as well? And would that have then built out things like the hybridization with the Ultimasaurus? And all of that other kind of stuff as well. So I think it's interesting thinking about it, because I think the toys as they are, when especially you look at sort of the modern lines, like the modern Mattel line, there's never really much correlation between what we get in the toy line and necessarily what's going to be in the films or what's going to be in the shows. The exception seems to be Captives, because Captives did post about Chaos Theory with their very first sort of Chaos Theory lines, and they had the Pyroraptor in there that has then subsequently been in the show. So you could question the connection there. But beyond that, it seems like they always have been quite separate. But that wasn't necessarily the case back in the 90s, which I find quite interesting. And something else I would touch on that I personally just find quite thought-provoking is the idea of the G.I. Joe X Jurassic Park line, because I know a few people have spoken about that in the community recently. And this, for anyone that doesn't know, and this is my knowledge on this is very surface level. So if I'm getting this wrong, please, people, feel free to shout at me. But it basically looked like Hasbro were planning a line that was going to reuse elements of the Jurassic Park line and elements of the G.I. Joe line. So there's like a G.I. Joe Ore Striker that has got InGen decals on it that it just looks like an InGen dirt buggy instead of a G.I. Joe one.
Right.
And my whole question there is, well, if they had released that line, would we have then seen like a crossover comic or a crossover cartoon show? Because obviously G.I. Joe did that so much more. So it's a whole interesting conundrum, and I feel like I've probably thrown a lot more question marks at you than you were expecting, but I really started thinking about it.
I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah.
That's incredible, because it got me thinking, when you're a kid watching the film, and the next logical continuation of the story for me was via those toys and actually just playing with them, and the original Topps cards that came along with those just had such amazing designs and illustrations, and they just sort of like fired my imagination. But that's interesting. This would G.I. Joe and Transformers and all of that got together and fought dinosaurs?
it's such a curious thing to think about,
I
isn't
wonder
it?
whether
Like,
Spielberg
yeah.
cancelled that. It's just like, no.
I have, even though I'm very much a child of the 2000s, I have dived back into like 80s and 90s nostalgia a bit recently, and for some reason I just really like the G.I. Joe line, even though I'm a Brit. It feels really weird, but here we are. And just like looking at that original G.I. Joe movie and how over the top that animation
Oh
is,
God, yeah.
just
Yeah.
imagining some kind of crossover with Jurassic
I
feels
know.
crazy.
Yeah. They were probably just looking at any sort of kind of avenue that they'd be able to expand with.
It's so interesting though, because I think like looking at the so again, the chaos effect line, and this is something that Paolo goes into a lot of detail in on that video on Jurassic Collectables, and I imagine it will be out by the time people are seeing this. But that there was kind of a whole thought process behind the hybrids in that line and what sort of characteristics had gone into them, what their behavior would be like. So I think a lot of the time we maybe take for granted that actually a lot of thought does go into the copy as written for things like toys. And although it's not necessarily canonical, and I'm sure we'll get onto discussions of continuity later, given that's been exploding in the fandom. But although it's not, it's still interesting to just think about how captivating that is actually, and how that maybe inspires other things that we see later on.
Yeah. It's such a simple thing, like those cards that you got.
Yeah.
They were just so simple and had, 3 words on it?
Yeah.
But it just, conjured up a whole scenario and made you think about the continuation of that first story and all the dinosaurs and all the interactions with dinosaurs. I'd like to move and look at the comics next, which were kind of the first thing that really arrived afterwards. And I had a few of these when they came out in about around 94, I think. It was between the two films, the first lot, which was called Return to Jurassic Park. Have you ever seen any of these?
I've seen bits and pieces of them, and I've seen some of the lore videos on them that have been done over the years, and there's some wacky stuff, isn't there? Like, doesn't one of them bring Robert Muldoon back to life?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought so.
So that's that one.
Yeah.
He kind of waves at the raptors or something, and that's how he comes. It's a bit
So that
pre
was
Owen
the
Grady
inspiration
sort
for
of.
Owen.
Yeah. And suddenly, I think they realised that they needed him back if they were going to tell a story about kind of rounding up dinosaurs. It is a bit fan fictiony, I think. the return to, but the artwork's stunning. You know, I sold mine years ago, unfortunately. And then there was like the wilderness years between Jurassic Park 3 and Jurassic World, where we got Jurassic Park Redemption, which even had people like Frank Miller involved in it. They came out in 2010, I think, and had Tim Murphy and Lex Murphy coming back. Was that around? Did you read any of those? Coming to the series?
It's not something that I ever stumbled across. I was a kid of lots of different fandoms. So when I was a teenager, I think my obsession with graphic novels kind of started, and that was with The Walking Dead. So I was like purely off down that kind of zombie track. But it's interesting thinking about that, because actually bringing back like Lex and Tim, for example, that's something that so many people touch on, and they probably could have easily done it in this sequel trilogy, but they didn't at any point. So it's quite interesting seeing where there's parallels with the stories that they've told in different mediums before, and where they choose not to do things, and kind of what is the reason for that.
Yeah. So the return of Jurassic Park was you going back to Isla Nublar, which we then didn't do in 2000 until 2015.
Yeah.
You know, that was kind of thought that that's maybe where the sequel to Jurassic Park might have gone. And then when you get to 2010 and you're looking at what might be the results of Jurassic Park 3 and that tying in, mainland stuff seems to be the main thing that they would. So Tim has got a facility cloning dinosaurs in Texas.
Oh, interesting.
And they all kind of break out, and there's somebody else who's trying to seek revenge on John Hammond's heirs. I think Ellie Sattler and Alan Grant are in it as well.
Yeah.
It's 5 issues. But yeah, much darker in tone. Anything that I was anticipating.
But that sounds really cool. I think it's interesting because something that I was actually thinking about touching on when I was reading the show notes for this episode as well is that initial return to Jurassic Park sounds an awful lot like it might have inspired Jurassic Park the game by Telltale, just with that whole idea that actually you're there parallel to the events of Jurassic Park, and then you're there afterwards, and you're kind of seeing facilities and things that were never seen in the first film. And I wonder if maybe the upcoming Jurassic Park Survival will take inspiration from that as well.
It's this desire, I think, to go back to that island at that time. I feel like we haven't fully explored what was planned at Jurassic Park. We saw such a small amount of it in that first film. And we can talk about the game. I think that was the only thing we got apart from those comics was that game in 2011. I think that came out. Not a very well received game at the time.
No, it's so interesting looking back at it because I went to get it on my Xbox recently, but it's not for sale, so I don't know what's going on there.
I used to have it on my iPad. I had that was the only way that, and you had to download it in sections. It was available in episodes.
Wow,
and there was constant updates to it to try and get it to work on people's, and all I was interested, the actual gameplay of it was so boring. It was just punching buttons. But the story I thought was really good. Yeah. But I thought the story was really good. I thought it was something that, when you look at Jurassic World, a lot of stuff in there that was really, that was kind of taken from it. And just seeing a damaged Jurassic Park was just what we wanted.
I think. There's something about that, isn't there? Because it's such an interesting choice to go from Jurassic Park straight to then Isla Sorna and the factory floor. I get it because it's an interesting new location, and obviously in the novels, Crichton had to do that because Isla Nublar is destroyed. But in the film, it's not. So it would have been quite interesting if there was a world where we would have gone back and seen that ruined park. And I think that's what actually is getting me really excited about Jurassic Park Survival. It's actually, are they going to build out more of that location? And could there be hints to other things? I always loved the idea that Dr. Sorkin from that game had just been working on the Tylosaur and it was tucked away somewhere as a sort of second phase attraction. I just think that's so cool because actually there probably was a lot of stuff like that on that island that we just never saw.
Well, there's that little bit in Jurassic World. Colin Trevorrow filmed 2 shots of it. One that it was after the raptors attack Claire in the van, and then it running after the van stops.
Yes.
And there's a sign that says research facility, I think is what it says. He filmed 2 versions, one that said the East Dock, but he wanted to plant a seed that there was separate research things going on that was adjacent to what Henry Wu was doing.
It's interesting. It is interesting because actually as we're getting into this conversation, it's made me think of something else that we didn't initially plan to touch on as well, actually, which is Jurassic World Aftermath. And I don't know how much of that you've seen, but that is basically this idea that there's a facility called the MMS facility. And I can't remember what it stands for, but they're training different raptors there. So it's almost like an offshoot of Idris, where they're training raptors with different things in this facility, and they're different velociraptors to the ones we see in, obviously, Jurassic World. And I think, again, that's quite a cool idea that actually maybe this other stuff was going on. But I think the thing that always makes me get a bee in my bonnet is we see so many cool ideas and concepts, but it never all gets pulled together. So it's this thing was going on over here, and then we're never going to reference it ever again. And I'm I would just love at some point all of that to be brought together somehow.
Yeah. Maybe we need a Mr. DNA to come and do an explainer video of all the little loose threads that are peppered throughout the Jurassic series.
I feel like I've pitched this before, but a Lowry and Vivian mockumentary series would just be incredible. Like The Office, but Jurassic World.
I think that whole period of the end of Jurassic Park 3 and then the beginning of Jurassic World, I think there was just so many things up in the air that the kind of Telltale game was the only thing that really Spielberg. I remember Spielberg being really pushing it because he was talking about it, I was so excited about it. You know, this is finally telling a story that I always wanted to tell, sort of thing. And you think 4 years after that, he must have had maybe a film in mind around that. I mean, as I've kind of spoken before, but there was so many people involved in making Jurassic World over that time. It was never dead in that time. Nobody ever put it away. It was just constantly being worked on.
Just production hell, yeah.
I just wonder whether the game was at some point a film.
It'd be interesting, wouldn't it? It would be interesting if they had originally planned to go back to that 93 era and tell a parallel story. And it's interesting, actually, that I always think it's interesting when they choose to do certain things, so when the timing of certain releases is. And I think it's interesting that right as we're starting a kind of quote-unquote new era to steal the marketing for Rebirth, we do have another project that is going back to that 93 era and is directly parallel with Jurassic Park. If I was a cynic, I would almost say that they like using that as a safety net. So if what they're planning doesn't do what they want it to, they can then always tap back into that nostalgia era.
I think you're right. I think Jurassic Park as a franchise is really interesting compared to a lot of the big ones like Star Wars and Marvel, is because essentially there's two novels that everything has come from, and they arrived at a time before franchises were even really a thing. It was just about creating a sequel and always about trying to get back to whatever made that first film brilliant and made people come and watch it. And I think every single film from The Lost World onwards has always tried to get back that magic of Jurassic Park. And even this one feels like Rebirth. It feels like that's what, again, they're trying to do.
The amount of times I have heard that line now of this is the research facility for the original park. Like they're using it in every trailer.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how that's going to tie into the original park and everything that we've seen in the previous, the 5 films afterwards. And another island, like,
it's
do we
just,
need?
Yeah,
it feels like once they leave somewhere, like they leave Nublar and they go to Isla Sorna.
Yeah.
Then they think, we can't go back to Isla Nublar. People just want Sorna. And then you leave Sorna and go back to Nublar and they're like, never go to Sorna again. You're just like, you've got it set up. It's seemingly just somewhere out there. The island hasn't gone. Very strange.
It's it's very easy to go into Rebirth territory, but I find that whole concept really interesting as well, because I want to know if they're going to reference Benjamin Lockwood at all, if they're going to lean back into that story and say that actually he knew about this island as well. Like, there's a lot of, I've said this to a lot of people. I think for me as like a longer term fan at this point, Rebirth will either live or die for me based on whether it takes the time to explain why that island exists. Because I think if it does and it gives like a fairly definitive answer, I'd be happy with that. It doesn't need to go massively in depth, but I think it at least needs to acknowledge it. And I'm a little bit worried that they'll just go, oh, here's another island, dinosaurs.
Yeah. Because his quote is that everything that comes, as we're talking about canon and the idea of canon, everything being connected, David Koepp has said that this film doesn't ignore anything that's gone before. What's his reference points going to be? I think this is a facility that hasn't just been, I'm hoping that it hasn't just been dormant. I like the idea that this is Wu's hideaway.
I'm never going to forget that shot of him just appearing in the little helicopter dock. Like, that just is such a funny scene. I'm curious because I think, and this is something that Brad and I talk about a lot, is the fact that actually Jurassic has had the opportunity to do interconnectivity with its villains, but it's never really done it well. So something that has always bothered me, and you've probably heard me bring this up before, is the fact that we never get an explanation for who Hoskins is on the radio to.
Yep.
He's literally just like, we've got an opportunity here, and then that's it. We never find out who it is. Now, sure, you can imply that that's Mills, and that then leads into Fallen Kingdom,
Yeah.
But the films never bother to say it explicitly.
No.
And I really hope that if Rebirth is connecting to other things, it does it explicitly, because actually, I think when you're building a universe, especially, you can only imply connection for so long before people get frustrated with it.
And I think that's been Colin Trevorrow's approach. Is he said everything is soft canon.
Oh, we're hitting the topical talking point now. The community is up in arms around it.
Explain this this issue that is currently bubbling away.
I mean, I've got to check. I'm assuming you have. Have you watched all of Chaos Theory season 3?
I have. Yes.
Okay, cool. So
I finished it today.
Amazing. There we go. That's timing. So the big bee in the bonnet that people seem to have at the moment is the idea that Brooklyn and the Handler were in the truck with the Atrociraptor cages in Dominion.
Yes.
Which I get. I understand that it's a bit of a stretch. But at the end of the day, when you watch Chaos Theory, you can see that they've taken as many steps as they possibly could to make that make sense. So I don't see why it's a big issue. A lot of people say that the continuity isn't right in those scenes and whatnot. But legally, DreamWorks do have to change it a little bit, so it's not an exact match of Dominion. They're not allowed to use the same lines or anything.
Okay.
So that was something that Scott said in his interview with Brad. He was explaining that because of some of the rights issues with the actors union, they actually have to change the dialogue. So that in itself, I'm like, you're not going to get 100% continuity, but it's close enough that you know what it's intending to be.
Yeah.
So I don't see it as an issue. I think people are probably looking for something to get annoyed about, because that is just what tends to get the most traction online, unfortunately.
I think we can probably start talking about the TV series as we've moved into it. That'd be great. So Camp Cretaceous is the starting point for us. And for anybody listening that is of my vintage, which I'm 38 now, and who might be thinking, oh, I love Jurassic Park growing up, I love the films, but I don't fancy watching a cartoon of it, I would say go and watch it. If you're a bit on the fence with the Jurassic World era, I can't think of a better way to help you kind of get into those bigger ideas than actually sitting down with these 6 kids. And I've fallen in love with all 6 of them. I even more so than Claire and Owen.
Yeah, I think they're just, I mean, the voice actors are phenomenal, firstly, and they've got so much charisma, and they really do kind of suck you into the story. But I think with Camp Cretaceous especially, I do think it's fair to say that season 4 and season 5 stretched it a little bit far.
Yeah.
And I know that gets a lot of criticism online, but I do think that ultimately Jurassic has always been a very grounded franchise.
Yes.
And I think it's clear with Chaos Theory, which we'll come on to, that they've learned from that and they are adapting to make sure that it's more grounded. But I think those first 3 seasons of Camp Cretaceous, what I really loved is we were talking about with Jurassic Park, how you never see much of the park and how you want to see more of it, but there has never really been the vessel to do that. But what that show really did was give you such a nice feel for Isla Nublar in that 2015 era, and kind of what else was on that island, what other attractions were around, what dinosaurs were potentially in closed off areas that you wouldn't necessarily see. And I just think all of that kind of stuff was really cool. Like I think back to the sequence with Toro especially, actually, and the idea that this Carnotaurus had behavioural problems, so it was kept in a separate paddock away from the park visitors. I just think that's such a cool way of making it feel like a real functional park.
Yeah.
Because places like zoos will have that, right? Where if there's an incident with an animal, maybe the animal gets moved into isolation. I think the showrunners really worked hard to make that feel so grounded. And I think what works so well with that show is the fact that you then build to that season 3 crescendo where you get it running parallel with the opening of Fallen Kingdom. And I just remember freaking out at that point. I was like, firstly, I feel sorry for these kids that they've been on this island for this long at this point. But just seeing that sequence from another perspective was so cool. And then kind of getting that additional insight into Henry Wu and what he was doing between Jurassic World and Fallen Kingdom. And, him being one of the first people to go back to the island and try and kind of pick over the bones of it was really cool. And then obviously the whole stuff with E750 as well. I mean, whether you like it or not, it makes a lot of sense that actually when you're making something like a hybrid, it's not going to go right the first time.
No.
And if anything, Rebirth looks set to build on that concept even further with the idea of the mutant and the idea that actually your first stab at making a dinosaur isn't necessarily going to come out how you want it to. So I think it just did a lot of really cool thematic stuff for the universe that you wouldn't get in a movie because a movie just can't take the time to do it.
And you couldn't get that in a live action show without it costing billions. The Camp Cretaceous series is just, so Zach Stentz, I think, said that it started, he got a call in 2017, and so he'd already scripted Marvel's Thor and X-Men First Class and had been involved in the Terminator franchise, the Sarah Connor Chronicles. And I love the aspect. The best part of the show, okay, for anybody who hasn't watched it, so there's a group of 6 kids that have kind of won a place at this summer camp, essentially, on Isla Nublar. And it's called Camp Cretaceous. And the kids are there while the events of Jurassic World are playing out. So while the Indominus Rex breaks out, and you get, Stentz says, a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead version of Jurassic World. That's a quote from him. So this idea that you get to see these little moments from Jurassic World, particularly like Masrani's helicopter exploding and going into the aviary, but you get to see it from these kids' point of view. And it's what's really fun about watching these watching Camp Cretaceous and Chaos Theory is the moments where it matches up with the franchise and it's going to play into it. And it's hitting that nostalgia and also fun because you're like, I really enjoyed that sequence of the film. And so it's like getting to relive it again.
Yeah. I always think about that moment where it's such a funny way of doing it, but they make a reference to the ACU team. And they literally just like open a cupboard and there's a bunch of radios and they all go red like one at a time.
Yeah.
And I was just like, that's such a fun way because I know exactly what scene that's referencing.
Yeah, it is. It's so effective. And as I say, you care so much about them. I think they fit so well with every other character that's been established in the series so far. And I think it's really important to say that they are a diverse set of kids. And not just, diverse heritage, but also socially, economically, and also queer relationships in the show. It just does so much in 23 minutes without sacrificing a lot of dinos as well.
Exactly. I think it's such a nice kind of onboarding piece for people because everybody is represented in it, right? Which is nice because I think when you're a young person, and it is fair to say that the target demographic for this is younger fans. And I think that's where people maybe get themselves in a knot is they think, it should be hyper realistic or anything. But the point is, it is for a younger demographic. And there's stuff there that we as adult fans can really enjoy. And that's because they're conscious of that secondary audience. But I think for those younger fans, they can see people on screen who feel like them, who represent them, which is not always the case in current media. So I think that's really important. But also B, I think actually it is that really nice onboarding piece in the sense that it is a story that actually tackles a lot of really common issues for people growing up. So I mean, take Darius's dad, for example, and Darius dealing with the loss of his dad and how that has an impact on him. That's something that's really relevant to young people who have had parents who have been in hospital or who they might have lost when they're young. And that's something that, again, a lot of shows don't necessarily tackle. Like, you get your action sequences. Like, I think back to my childhood, for example, I watched a lot of Codename Kids Next Door. I could not name you one serious theme that show ever tackled. So I think that's where Camp Cretaceous really does stand on its own. And I think it was actually quite interesting because I think Kirsten Kelly said this best in the interview that I got to do with her recently, where she was saying that actually people are growing up with this show, so they relate with the issues that are presented in it because the writers are writing from that perspective that connects with them, the kind of challenges you face as you're growing up. And I think that's so important because not only does it give people food for thought that will hopefully make them better people and better humans, but also it's getting people interested in the franchise at a young age, and it is building that next generation of fans who will come into it after all of us have gone on to the next thing.
I just think they've done such a good job to kind of been given a brief to do that, to kind of welcome new fans in, but they haven't just done a 20-minute, here's a dinosaur, all of that sort of stuff. There's so much else, so much human drama that is put into it as well, which I think is really important. Yeah, really rounded characters. And I suppose at this point, we've actually spent longer with those 6 characters than we have with any other characters within the Jurassic franchise.
It's interesting when you think about it, actually. We've spent 7 seasons with them at this point. So that just feels kind of crazy in itself. But I think it is a testament to the fact that long form television works so well. And I always think about Gary Oldman. So I really like Slow Horses.
Okay.
And I remember he gave an interview about that show. And he was like, actually, it's really rare that you get to keep coming back and keep getting to add layers to this character. Because obviously, a lot of his career is film, where he'll maybe do a single film with that character. And I think that's such a good point that actually, when you get to add more layers to a character, people are so much more connected to them than they would be if they just see them in one film and that's it. Like, you look at Billy Brennan, for example, his fan favorite character. But actually, how much do we know about Billy? Our relationship with him is still pretty surface level in contrast.
Yeah, we literally know nothing
that
about
he
Billy.
likes to steal legs, and that's it.
I wonder what ever happened to that start of that scene.
Yeah,
the girl that he's trying to impress while he's
that's a good question.
He comes back broken from East Lasagna.
It's got like a selfie in the military helicopter though to impress her. That's what he's gone for.
So Camp Cretaceous and its follow-up series, Chaos Theory, wasn't really the first attempt to do a series because, again, back in the 90s, and probably tying into those toys that we talked about earlier, that they tried to do I can't remember what it was called. I think it was called Return to Jurassic Park as well. And that was a cell and CGI kind of amalgamation program that was it was meant to be set up like Camp Cretaceous as well too. It was meant to be a prime time show that would cater to both adults and kids like Jurassic Park does. But it feels like, reading between the lines, that Spielberg just got a bit bored with it and probably would have cost a bit too much money at the time, and he didn't have the energy, because if you think, he was probably knee deep in Schindler's List at that point.
I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because actually at that point in Spielberg's career as well, I don't think he was necessarily that sequel driven. So that is really the era where a lot of his kind of cult films came out, I would say, that have such a prominence in pop culture. But he also then wasn't necessarily involved in the sequels, and I think that kind of really shows. So it's quite interesting just thinking about that and his sort of relationship with them at the time, I suppose.
I think Jurassic Park is special to him. And I've said this before, but because it's his.
Yeah. It's quite interesting, isn't it, actually? Because you saying that makes me wonder if the course correction from Dominion is a Spielberg influence.
Yeah.
Because that film did feel like it did the most to break away from the mold of what the films were beforehand. So I almost wonder if that course correction boils down to him not being fully comfortable with it.
And he's talked multiple times. The original book has the dinosaurs on the mainland. And it's something that he's very reluctant, apart from the bit at the end of The Lost World. He isn't interested in that very much, even though it feels inevitable that the dinosaurs are going to break out and be everywhere. And that's really logically the only way I can think of the story growing and expanding, is what Colin Trevorrow did and put them on the mainland and us living alongside them. But I think Spielberg likes the idea of the Lost World, the idea that we can all live in this world where there aren't dinosaurs. But imagine going to somewhere that you don't know and coming across a dinosaur. I think for him, that feels more exciting and more akin to the people's journey to Jurassic Park in the first film. And I think maybe that's what he's trying to get back to.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that because obviously I said to you before we started recording that I'm working on a book at the moment, and one of the most interesting challenges with that, I think, is finding a story thread that enables you to have multiple dinosaurs in a location. So in the case of that book, I decided to just work with one dinosaur because it felt like suddenly having loads of them would feel quite contrite to the story. So I almost wonder if that is part of the reason why he's so keen to stick to the islands, because actually
Yeah.
you can say the island is a facility and then that's it. It gives you scope to have whatever animals you want there. Whereas if all the animals are in the wild, suddenly having like a T-Rex and a Velociraptor and God knows what else showing up at the exact same location at the same time feels too coincidental.
And with Dominion, the amount. So, what Chaos Theory has managed to do, I think, in its latest series is expand the lore of Dominion and kind of realize maybe what Colin Trevorrow wanted the film to do, which is the fact that it's a globe-trotting adventure, which is what Dominion is. And even though it's 2.5 hours long or whatever, and even longer, I think, with the extended cut, it still feels rushed and it still feels like we don't have enough time with the characters. And so, a bit like Clone Wars has done for the prequels, Chaos Theory is doing that with Dominion, definitely for me, and kind of getting us to properly understand the implications of the locus, which I'm sure they're going to touch upon in whatever the next series will be. You know, going to the Dolomites and going to Barson Valley and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
There's so many good ideas in Dominion. And I think if Colin Trevorrow had been allowed his first vision, which I think was 2 films.
And I'm questioning whether I'm meant to talk about this publicly because I can't remember where I heard this. So this could be chaotic. But I'm sure I heard something at one point in time about there being like a dinosaur boat that was going around places with Henry Wu on it and whatnot. So it sounded like they were playing with some really interesting concepts at one point in time. And then it just, for whatever reason, all got merged together. But like you say, I could totally see a film where we are just dinosaurs are in the world, here's lots of different scenarios we're dealing with, and then let's bring it back to Biosin Valley. And it's something I've always said. I think Universal have made the mistake of running before they can walk, in the sense of going straight from Dominion to Rebirth. If it had been me and I was looking at the franchise as a whole, I would say, okay, let's do Fallen Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
Let's then have some standalone films or something and like a live action TV show. And let's then pull all of that back together for Dominion as our conclusion.
Yeah.
So it felt like they sort of opened the door to do that and then immediately shut the door at the same time.
It's a very interesting thing, I think, the Jurassic, as we're seeing now, and whatever's going to play out in Rebirth, of kind of how they see the lore of Jurassic Park, and how it all connects. I wonder whether they even mind that it needs to connect. I don't think they mind about us having these conversations. I think they're just desperate to get the people who maybe went to see Jurassic World, went to see Fallen Kingdom, and then maybe didn't go and see Dominion.
Yeah, exactly.
I think they want to go, let's try and get those people back and do Jurassic World again. And let's just try and get that energy back into it.
I'm gonna plant a thought into your brain here, Roland, and you're gonna hate me for this because it's gonna really make you think. Well,
I'm gonna lose sleep over this, aren't
I? One of the things I love about Chaos Theory Season 3 is the fact that it sets up that before Dominion, the Amberclave market was actually being run by Biosin. My question is, how long were Biosin running that black market for? Because it feels like there's one hell of a backstory potential there.
I just think it's so, like, when I first watched Dominion and sat down in the cinema to watch it, it's like my eyeballs were just being slapped with so many ideas. I was like, oh my word. And it was And the fact that Lewis Dodgson, somebody who comes back, and I think he's fantastic in Chaos Theory. Oh, I just hate him. He's like never looking up from his phone, the driverless cars, the drone helicopter thing. Because that really made me laugh, because at the end of series 3 of Chaos Theory, when they're having the big dinosaur fight in not a coliseum, but looks like a coliseum essentially. And I'm thinking,
it made me laugh so much because in my non-spoiler review of the show, I was like, there's a scene that will make you think of Ridley Scott. And people were like, oh, there's going to be something really well directed. It's going to be like prestige. And I was like, I'm more mean location than anything.
And I was just thinking, why, what's going on with this pilot in the middle of this? And I thought, okay, that's a joke. They had to slip that in. Not just this pilot just sitting there looking at his watch going, oh, come on, not again. I've had to deal with this at the other end.
I love the idea of that. And this is just like a random little tangent I've gone on before. But I love the idea because that helicopter for Dominion was a bespoke Eurocopter design. It's not a helicopter that actually exists. So they modified it with the fans on the side. And I love the idea that that's like the one of that helicopter that exists. So this helicopter has like flown Grant and Sattler into the valley. It's then gone to Malta to pick up the kids, brought them back, and then landed just in time for Kayla to get it, to then get everyone out.
Oh my word.
I just love that idea.
That needs a charging port. At what point does that...
Yeah. That's actually what happened off screen in Dominion, is the helicopter crashed, and that's why we only see Alan and Ellie at the end.
That's what I want to see in the kind of credits for Chaos Theory, is that somebody just plugging that thing in.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, amazing. So away from the TV series, I think another area that hasn't really been explored is the book side of things.
Yes.
So, Jurassic Park started as a novel, 2 novels, and I'm really surprised that the estate of Michael Crichton has not explored doing more, because the only thing that we've had so far is The Evolution of Claire, which is a young adult novel by Tess Sharp that came out just as a kind of build-up to Fallen Kingdom. Do you know, have you read that? Do you mind giving us a brief synopsis of the story?
I'll give an overview. So it's basically the idea that Claire is on Isla Nublar as part of the kind of graduate program. So she's on the island with several other people. And it was basically their kind of non-subtle way of setting up the character turn that Claire suddenly goes through in Fallen Kingdom. So basically, Evolution of Claire presents Claire as being this animal-loving character and shows that she actually really cares about all the dinosaurs. She's quite focused on their well-being. And then suddenly she realizes that to get any influence and really make a difference, she needs to be like an operations manager.
Yeah.
So that's where she goes into hard sort of wired Claire mode that we see in Jurassic World. It's really interesting, though, because in the novel, you do get a flavor for them kind of building Nublar. And there is a scene where they bring a raptor across from Isla Sorna, and that raptor actually ends up attacking Claire's love interest and killing him, which is quite brutal. So it kind of has like all of the elements of an interesting Jurassic story. It just never really goes anywhere because the whole way it was pitched, I feel, was to justify her character arc in Fallen Kingdom. But obviously you have Jurassic World slap bang in the middle of this book and then Fallen Kingdom. So it kind of just derails it, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, I remember it being quite atmospheric in places. And it's also a bit of the lore that I want to see more of. My idea for a future Jurassic Park project or whatever is how a world goes from seeing a T-Rex in San Diego to Jurassic World actually happening and that being announced. And it does talk about how that was announced and kind of like people getting boxes and all that sort of stuff, which I thought was really fun. But if you think of all the people that were involved in those first 3 films and stories, how would they be? And I know people have talked about this. I think Jack's talked about this on Jurassic Outpost and the In General podcast. Like all of those survivors of Jurassic, how would they feel about Masrani coming in and building this Jurassic World and actually succeeding in opening it? I feel like I think there would be an amazing story to be told of the fact from that T-Rex breaking out in San Diego to Jurassic World opening.
Yeah, I could almost see that being like your opening episode, right? Where you get more angles of that San Diego sequence, and that's kind of your inciting incident, and then you go from there.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be said about that as well, actually, because obviously we see is it Extinction Now in Fallen
Yeah.
Kingdom coming sort of like out of the ashes of Jurassic World. So I guess the question would be, have all those groups always been bubbling around?
Yeah.
Have there been like any eco-terrorism incidents or anything like that on Isla Nublar, and how do they deal with that kind of stuff? I think the plot thread I've always found quite interesting is the stuff that obviously Sam and Jack and the viral marketing guys did with like the 2001 cleanup.
Yep.
And actually, how does then Hoskins get involved more in InGen? What does that look like as Masrani slowly takes it over as well? So there's a lot of the key sort of incidents already outlined, but we just don't have any of the connective tissue for it, and that could be quite cool.
Yeah.
I could see that being done in like a kind of really interesting drama as well, where it wouldn't necessarily be focused on the dinosaurs, but rather the characters and their relationships with each other, which would be quite
Yeah.
cool.
I sort of imagine kind of like an investigative journalism sort of thing, undercovering.
The thing I have in my mind, and it's just because I've watched it recently, have you seen Paradise?
No, I've not seen
No,
Paradise.
so that is a really good show, mainly because the way they market it is not what the show is at all.
Okay.
And it has like a lot of twist in it that I didn't see come in. And I could just see a story like that working so well for that, where you kind of get the initial, oh, we're not going to launch a new Jurassic Park, we're actually just doing like a conservation project. And then suddenly it switches and you realize that this is like the start of Jurassic World or something
Maybe
else.
that's what we're getting with have you been following the Colossal stuff?
No.
The people that supposedly bring back the direwolf and the woolly
Yes.
mammoth.
No, I've seen some of that. I
Maybe-
messaged a friend earlier and I was like, can you explain this to me as if I was 7 years old?
I thought it was a viral marketing campaign for the new film when I first saw it. I was like, oh God.
That would have been impressive, to be
Yeah.
fair.
But maybe they are. Maybe they're just like, we're doing all of this. And then suddenly, giant locusts are now roaming the earth. I'll probably cut that out because they'll probably get me for libel.
I mean, all I'm going to say is they were so preoccupied with whether they could that they never stopped to think if they should.
Another bit that I'd like to touch on, I don't know because I've never seen it, but the Jurassic World live show.
Yes, yeah. So that I've not seen it either, and I was absolutely gutted that it got stopped before they could do a UK tour, because I think that would have been really cool. But from what I understand, that runs parallel with Jurassic World at points, and then it also establishes a facility in Chile. And the facility in Chile is where I think it's Genie, the Troodon, is based out of. And it's like another InGen research facility. So that kind of stuff I really like. Like the here's actually a pitch for a story for you. So I realize and I'm hitting this too early in our conversation, but I'm gonna go for it anyway. Something that has always lived rent-free in my brain is the fact that in the viral marketing there's the Martel facility in Siberia.
Yes.
And that's the facility that apparently brought back the woolly mammoth, right? And I just love the idea of this InGen facility that since the fall of Jurassic World has maybe fallen into ruin and something has got out. Because I just think this facility in the Arctic is so different to anything else we've ever seen.
Yeah.
So I'd love to see something like that as well. But to tie that back into what you were originally saying, I just think the live tour opens the potential for other InGen facilities in quite an interesting way.
Yeah. And it was conceived by Colin, and he this is canon. This is exactly this is part of the whole expanded universe.
It's interesting. I was going to say I find it interesting because I don't like how it feels like they'll say something is canon until it's not.
Yep.
like that seems to be a lot of the approach, which I get, because I think in any universe, or when you're building a universe, ultimately, if it's a film franchise, what happens in the films is gospel, right? And
Yeah.
everything else is
Yeah.
around that. And you kind of see that to some extent with Marvel. So I
Mm.
always think of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because
Yeah.
that was my favorite TV show growing up. And actually, there's a lot that could have crossed over there, but also a lot that they have definitely contradicted.
Yeah.
And I just think with that kind of stuff, it's kind of a shame, because I'm like, if you're going to build an expanded universe, actually commit to it
Mhm.
and make sure that what you're doing is going to be consistent, and it's not just going to be a case of actually this is the thing until the next film, or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think that's maybe something that the Jurassic era under Colin struggled with particularly, because I always think back to the retcon on the Maisie and Charlotte Lockwood story, and I just think that
Yeah.
that in itself, I think it's very easy to listen to online criticism and to course correct and pivot. And I think if you're constantly doing that kind of pivoting, then you never build anything, because you're constantly adapting to expectations as opposed to sticking to your original vision on things.
Fans and have grown in their voice, I think, and how much they're being listened to. I think after Star Wars Last Jedi and the massive course correction that happened with Last Skywalker, Rise of
Rise of
Skywalker,
Skywalker, yeah.
I was a real big fan of The Last Jedi, and I'm sure people will hate me for that, but I, but I, it was a film that did something different and subverted expectations and all that fun stuff. Because once you throw out what you think you're coming to sit down and see, you then feel unsafe, and that's fun. That's fun to not know what's going to happen. And then immediately, the whole film is just completely turned around in the start of Rise of Skywalker, and it just feels like, who are you playing to? Who do you want to win over?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering what do you think is kind of missing from the expanded Jurassic World? What do you want to see? Like, if you were given the money, you sat down in front of Frank Marshall, he said, "Tell me, Tom, what you want to see."
Yeah, so I mean, really, this in a nutshell is why I started writing Tales from the Jurassic World, because I just felt that at the end of Fallen Kingdom there is so much potential for storytelling there. Like there's a million different scenarios that you could come up with. You know, people more creative than me could come up with really interesting scenarios to put these dinosaurs into. But I remember, and I think I said this on a episode of In General once. I had this idea, and this was what really birthed Tales, was this idea of like, what if a police detective thinks there's a string of missing people murders? It like leads them to a subterranean tunnel system, but instead of a murderer's hideout, they find a baryonyx or something similar. And like that just kind of concept, I think that alone really has made me think that actually there's so much space for standalone stories in Jurassic. Especially in that period of time where these dinosaurs were in the wild, but also equally, you know, the viral marketing and to an extent the films did such a good job setting up both the DPW and the US Fish and Wildlife Service that you literally have an organization that is the equivalent to Primeval's Anomaly Research Center, in the case that you have got a government entity that can respond to sightings of these dinosaurs. So you have a mechanism to tell a Monster of the Week show in a really interesting way. And I really feel like they've missed a massive trick by not doing that, because I think what I find really interesting, actually, and again, it comes back to timing, is I feel like Universal were potentially a little bit nervous about bringing dinosaurs to the silver screen, and whether that would be effective, whether they'd be able to do it in a way that serves justice to that. And then at the same time, you have this space of time where that story could be told. You have Legacy releasing Monarch, Legacy of Monsters, and showing that actually characters like Godzilla and characters like Kong, such a good show.
So good.
But showing that those characters and other monsters as well can be brought to the silver screen in a really meaningful way. So I actually think that show in itself has a lot for Universal to learn from in terms of how they can do that sort of large scale creature on the small screen, and also actually world build, because I think one of the best things in that show was where they show you little things like the Titan shelters or the signposts that are in the towns and cities to show people where to go in the event of an attack. All of that kind of stuff is exactly what we should have seen with Jurassic after Fallen Kingdom. And it kind of felt like we were getting a taste of it with Battle at Big Rock. But then for whatever reason, we never got more of that. So that is really what I do. I know it would be uncomfortable for Universal and it would be uncomfortable for the filmmakers, but I would say, okay, we've got Rebirth. Now let's go back to before Rebirth, because they've already set the stage for a lot of stories to be told there and they just haven't delivered on it yet.
I love Monarch. I think that is, to have a film series that has gone quite as bonkers as the Monsterverse, and then to, like, in between, really big, crazy, and I mean, everything in that franchise is just out there. There's aliens, there's all sorts. There is, you can pick your flavor of Godzilla, and I think the Monarch, again, a bit like the Chaos Theory and Camp Cretaceous, those, like the Hollow Earth stuff that the films do in a kind of flyby explanation, the series goes into it, and by the time that you actually, spoilers for anybody who's not seen it, but when you actually get into the Hollow Earth and it is crazy and there's time bending, all sorts of stuff going on, you're so invested in those characters that none of that matters. You are along for the ride, and it is just amazing that you can get a show like that where you put the scare back into Godzilla, and whenever whatever arrives, it's just phenomenal. You get the real fear factor, which is what Gareth Edwards did so well.
Yeah. And like I that is the one thing that gets me really excited, is Gareth knows how to do scary. And also I think subjectively, although it got mixed critical reception, I think the creator was an absolutely phenomenal film. So I'm really excited that he's helming Rebirth. I think to the point about Monarch as well, actually there is a way in that to have your cake and eat it too. Because actually what I'm thinking already with you saying that is people want more classic Jurassic, right? What if there's another Jurassic Park vet who doesn't make his way off of the island in 1993, and then his kid has to pick up the trail and work out what happened to him? And then that gets him onto Isla Nublar in the wake of the Jurassic Park incident. Maybe he bumps into Dr. Maya Joshi while he's there and just says, go off and do your thing in the game. But I just think there's a lot of ways that they could do that. It's all about thinking creatively. And I actually think, like, something that I'll share quickly, I've got it here if I move my camera, is one thing that I've been working with as I've been working on my book is this. So this is Save the Cat's Guide to Writing a Novel. And what I found really interesting with this is it literally has an outline of like the different story genres. So institutionalized is one example where it's up against like a big government entity. There's rites of passage stories, there's detective stories, superhero stories. All of those, I think if you look at the Jurassic franchise and then view it through the lens of what kind of story do I want to tell, there's a lot of potential for all of those kinds of stories to work in it. It's just finding the right characters and the right plot.
I think that's it. And I think that goes for every single media. Whatever story you want to tell, get your characters right and we will follow. Fab. I was just wondering, if you just tell us a little bit about Tales from a Jurassic World, working on this latest series that you've done. You've had a score made for it. It sounds great.
Yeah. Honestly, it's insane because it has got to the point where I feel like the project has outgrown me. So massive shout out to Brooks Leiby, because he has just taken the scoring of this project and really run with it. And he got like a full orchestra involved this time around, which is just crazy. But I think it's really exciting for all of us, because I sat down and I developed this initial story after I watched Jurassic World Dominion for the first time. So at this point, this story has been in my head for like 3 or 4 years. And I think it's really exciting to be coming to the point where we're hitting that conclusion point, because A, that means we're going to get to deliver on the story that we always set out to tell, which is really exciting. But B, much like Chaos Theory, the end of Tales from a Jurassic World runs parallel with the events to Jurassic World Dominion. And that was because a very specific scene in Jurassic World Dominion was the inspiration for the entire series. So I'm really excited that we're kind of at this convection point where I'm about to release the final season of this that runs parallel to Dominion. And the writers at DreamWorks have also decided to go parallel to Dominion at the same time. It just feels like such a crazy coincidence that it's all happened at the same time.
Yeah.
But I'm really excited to get it out, and I hope that with the reception that Chaos Theory has got, and with the renewed interest that it's put in Dominion for a lot of people, hopefully they get a kick at getting to maybe follow a couple of other characters who were in Biosyn Valley at the same time as well.
Yeah, there's so many creative people out there attached to the Jurassic Park fandom, and it's amazing to see.
It really is. It's a constant source of inspiration, and I think I've been, with that project especially, I've been really touched by how many people have given their time and energy into sort of lending their voices to the characters, or just kind of supporting it when it's released. Like it's been quite nice actually, because what I've done for the past couple of seasons is do like a cast watch party before we then release the season, so people can see it a little bit in advance. And it was quite nice with the last one, seeing a couple of the same faces then pop up for that, and knowing that they kind of supported that project all the way through. But I mean, there's people doing so many things. Like I had the pleasure of being involved in Muzamil, so Muzshako7 on Twitter. I think it's his Twitter handle, or it's his Instagram. He does a thing that's Jurassic World Resort TV, and that's all about showing the actual television programs from the resort, which is so cool. I'm so sorry that you've seen the last one, because that means you've seen my really bad Texan accent. But just like stuff like that, I think it's so cool that there's people kind of thinking about all different angles, and there's so many different things that sort of captivates people's imagination and makes them want to build on the franchise. So I think it's so cool. There's just so many talented people. I mean, we've not even touched on things like the motor pool, but there's literally people out there making the most detailed replicas of vehicles from the films as well. It's a really cool space to be in, I think.
And hopefully much more to come in the future from people as well.
Fingers crossed, eh? Let's hope that Jurassic World Rebirth is an actual rebirth and not a death.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Well, yeah, I'd just like to say thank you so much for taking the time to come and to speak to me and to talk about this expanding and confusing, maddening, which is the expanded universe of Jurassic. Where can people find you online if they haven't done already?
Yeah, well, I mean, firstly, thank you for having me on this, Roland, and congratulations for launching a new show as well, because that's really exciting. And I thought it was so cool seeing that you had come along and put together a show in the build up to Rebirth. So hopefully people are really enjoying this. And yeah, if you want to find me, I'm Tom Jurassic on Instagram, Twitter, and Blue Sky. I do want to leave Twitter eventually, not gonna lie, but there's a lot of Jurassic fans there, so I'm hoping people make the jump eventually. And then also on Jurassic Collectables and the Jurassic Park Podcast.
Amazing. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. And everybody, go out and listen to Tales from a Jurassic World. My huge thanks to Tom for that conversation. It was really fun, and I'm so glad that two British Jurassic fans managed to get together and just chat about Jurassic Park for a bit. Tales from a Jurassic World returns on the 23rd of May. So please go over and follow Tom Jurassic on Instagram at Tom_Jurassic, and also listen to him on the fantastic Jurassic Park Podcast, hosted by Brad Jost, who will be a guest in a couple of weeks' time talking about Jurassic World. But next week, I'm talking to Connor O'Keefe And we're talking about the actual dinosaurs, because my dinosaur knowledge might be a bit rusty. So it's a great conversation. It's really fun. We dig into 3 really popular dinosaurs and look at the science behind them and what we see in the film. So that will be next week. If you like what I do here, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and let me know your favourite bit of expanded media. Do you really like the Telltale game, or are you an absolute fan of the evolution of Claire? Please let me know your thoughts about all of those on my Instagram, which is at Road to Rebirth Pod. But until next time, I'll just say thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.